This design caught my eye immediately, and I knew I had to make both variations. The 6 layers don't take long to cut, and once they're glued together, they form a useful and eye-catching little storage dish for jewelry, coins, or anything you'd like. It will make an excellent gift for Valentine's Day or any other time you want to surprise your significant other. All you need to make one or both is a scroll saw, some 1/4-inch thick material, and a couple of hours in your workshop. Let's get started. This pattern is a little unusual. I'm not quite sure what to compare it to. It's from Steve Good, and it's for Valentine's Day or just any occasion you want to say I love you to your significant other. One of these is square and one is round. It calls for 1/4-inch material. I think that's the most appropriate material for something like this. And I took some 4/4 oak and resawed it. If you'd like to learn more about resawing to obtain thinner material, I'll leave a link to my video on the subject on the screen and in the description. I took a long, narrow piece of 4/4 oak, then resawed and planed it down to 2 1/4-inch pieces. I used scroll saw tape to attach the patterns to the wood. The circle and square each require 4 levels with hearts cut from them, each increasingly smaller, one level where we'll cut the words love you, and a bottom layer, a square or a circle with no cutting required. I'm going to take these over to my drill press to make the pilot holes, and then I'll cut the long boards into smaller sections that will be easier to handle with the scroll saw. I'm starting with the square version of the project, and as usual, I'll make the interior cuts first. Except for the 5th layer with the words love you, these won't be intricate cuts. I drilled the pilot holes for the hearts near the point on the bottom. I threaded the blade through the pilot hole and tightened it in the upper blade holder. Through experience, I've developed a method that works well for cutting these hearts, and shapes like them. I cut from the pilot hole to the bottom of the heart, then reversed the blade to the pilot hole. There's lots of room to maneuver there, and I turned the workpiece 180 degrees, then backed the blade's dull side to the point where I stopped cutting just seconds before. But now I can easily pivot just a few degrees to start cutting in the direction I need to go to cut the heart. Then it's just a matter of following the line back to the starting point at the bottom. Since there are 2 layers with hearts on this piece of stock, remember I trimmed those long pieces down to manageable size, I'll cut the second heart in the same manner as the first, and then I'll cut the squares. I have to confess I made a slight tactical error when trimming these patterns from the printed pages. I should have trimmed the squares close to the lines, but left the lines in place to cut with the wood later. For the 2 or 3 squares placed at the end of a board, I could trim one side of the square to line up with the board's edge. Instead, I trimmed one edge from each of the squares. This means I'll need to cut carefully without a line on one side, using only the paper's edge as a guide. With the second heart completed, I moved on to the straight cuts to make the squares. The scroll saw is not the best tool for cutting straight lines, but these squares are only 3 1/4 inches on a side, so it will do. I don't like cutting pieces this small in the table or radial arm saws because they are almost dangerously small. The bandsaw will cut faster and a little straighter than the scroll saw, but again, that would mean getting my fingers uncomfortably close to the blade. My number 1 safety rule in the shop is not to perform any operation that gives me the slightest bit of doubt about its safety. The first 2 layers are cut, so I pull the pattern off with the scroll saw tape. As I hold these 2 layers together, you can begin to get an idea of what the completed project will look like. There was no need to show me cutting the last 2 layers with hearts, but it is worth another look at how the project is shaping up. Here are the 4 levels with heart cutouts. The next level, where the letters are cut, is going to be the most challenging part. I drilled the pilot holes for the letters with, I believe, a 5/32 drill bit. Any larger than that, the bit would not have fit within the boundaries of the letters. Any smaller, and threading the blade through the pilot hole might have become challenging. Many patterns I make contain letters, so I've developed suitable techniques for cutting them. My first tip is to slow down the blade speed if your scroll saw has this capability. The blade is most aggressive at full speed, and that can make it easy to cut past the line before you realize it's happening. With material like this, I usually slow the blade to about half speed. My second cutting tip for letters is to stay inside the line rather than to follow the usual practice of cutting exactly on the line. The letter O best illustrates why this is a good practice. If you would venture even a tiny bit past the lines on the O, the top and or bottom parts could end up touching, and the center part of the O would fall out. Even if the lines didn't touch, they could become so close to one another that the small piece of connecting wood might break at the slightest pressure. Staying inside the lines for all the letters is a good practice because there needs to be a slight separation between letters. There are places in designs where straying from the cut lines is hardly noticeable, but cutting out letters is not one of them. You could easily ruin a project with sloppy letter cutting. There are no interior cuts on the bottom layer, just the outside cuts to make it a square. With all 6 layers together, we now have an excellent view of the finished project. Cutting the letters for the project's circular version is done like the letters for the square one. If you've ever tried to cut circles before, you know that making a perfect circle by hand is not easy. I'll cut right on the line, but I know from experience that there will be slight imperfections. After I glue the 6 sections together, I'll have an opportunity to correct these with a disc sander, but I would like these as round as possible to make that step unnecessary, if at all possible. Cutting the hearts and then the outer circles didn't take long. Here's what they look like when stacked the way they will be for the Glueup. I pulled the square version from the countertop to compare the two side by side. I like them both. Both versions look like the cutting was accurate, and only a tiny amount of sanding will be needed after the Glueup and before I apply a finish. The logical way to construct this sandwich is to build it from the bottom up. The lowest layer is a plain square with no interior cuts. The layer with the words "love you" goes on top of that, so I apply glue to its bottom side and spread it around with an acid brush. Getting glue to the edges is essential to ensure a good bond and prevent the edges from coming loose. Once the glue was applied, I set the 2 layers on top of one another, ensuring the grain ran in the same direction on both pieces. The next layer comprised the smallest heart, and once again I added glue to the bottom of the piece and spread it around. I decided to add glue to the top of that piece, and after doing so, I realized I needed to be very careful not to spread glue onto areas the next layer on top wouldn't touch. I also added glue to the top of that piece, but then I switched tactics. Adding glue to the bottoms of the succeeding layers made much more sense because that way I didn't have to be concerned about putting glue where it wasn't needed. I used that practice for the remaining layers. Once I had all the layers together, I tapped the assembly like you would a deck of cards to align the bottom and sides. Since the end of the workbench was nearby, I used it to apply clamping pressure to the bottom of the assembly. I applied 2 F-clamps, one on each corner, to hold the top of the assembly together. There was some glue squeeze out, which is in fact desirable. If you don't get any squeeze out, it may be because the joint is glue starved. Some squeeze out shows there's glue to the edge, and you can easily wipe it off before it dries or sand it off after the glue is cured. Now that I have this process psyched out, I can move on to the circular version of the project. I felt that adding glue only to the bottoms of each layer gave me the best results, so I did every layer that way. On the squares, it was easy to line up the layers by the edges, but for the circles, I had to carefully align the bottom of each heart and ensure the reveal was equal on each side. With these layers glued up, I took the assembly to the glass on the other side of my workbench for clamping. I used my disc sander to touch up the edges of both versions of the project, and then I gave them both a couple of coats of warm set and spray polyurethane. I've shown them side by side, then individually, so you have a good idea of their appearance. As always, I value your comments. Do you plan on making one or both of these? How will you use them? Will it be just as decorations, or will you use them to store rings or other small items? I have several other Valentine's Day items planned for the following few videos. After them, is there any particular project or procedure you'd like to see? Until then, there are suggestions on the screen for the following 2 videos I'm sure you'll enjoy.